Well, welcome. We are so glad you're joining with us this holiday weekend. And if your weekend is anything like our family, it is filled with picnics and barbecues, visiting friends and family. So we hope yours is too. But we are so glad that you took some time out of your weekend to spend with us. And maybe it's not the weekend. Maybe you're watching us later. But either way, we hope you will let us know that you're here. And it's easy to do that. There's links right in front of you, whether it's on YouTube or you're on our online church. So let us know you're here. Let us know how we can be praying for you, because we would love to do that. We all got things that we would love to take to the throne of God, and we want to do that with you. So let us know. If you are a regular watcher or a regular in-person attender, we want to say thank you for your support, and there's ways to give, and best way is secure give, so you can just click on that and do that. But this weekend, you may be lighting off fireworks, you may be going to see fireworks, but this whole thing, this American experiment, started because a bunch of people had this great idea, and it started with a plan that they believed that there could be a different way to do a country. And so this weekend, take some time to be grateful to our forefathers who set this whole thing up.
be moved. We will praise you till we see your kingdom. Greater things are surely coming. You are God, you are on the move. Oh, you are on the move. Oh, this is our revival anthem. Can you feel the darkness shaking? Oh, we are the dry bones rising. This will be a great awakening. This is our revival anthem. This will be a great awakening. This is our revival anthem. Take these hands. I know they're empty, but with you they can be used for beauty in your perfect hand. All I am is yours. Take these feet. I know they stumble, but you use the weak. You use the humble, so please use me. All I am is yours. I give you all my life. I'm letting it go. A living sacrifice, no longer my own. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. Take this heart, set it on fire, shining in the dark. I wanna tell the world of who you are. All I am is yours. I give you all my life. I'm letting it go. A living sacrifice, no longer my own. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. I give you everything. To you I belong. Every beat of my heart, the breath in my lungs. All I am is yours. All I am is yours. I lift my hands up, God, I surrender all that I am for your glory, your honor, your fame. I lift my hands up, God, I surrender to you. I give you all my life. give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. You give life, you are love, you bring light to the darkness, you give hope, you restore every heart that is broken. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. All the earth will shout your praise. Our hearts will cry, these bones will sing. Great are you, Lord. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise, pour out our praise. It's your breath in our lungs, so we pour out our praise to you only.
So, what's your favorite color? Maybe it's blue or green or Red, orange. My favorite, I think, is blue. And I think because I don't know, I'm not really crazy about any one color particular. But did you know that colors are known to change our moods? For example, blue invokes trust and loyalty. So when you see a blue, that's what it brings, okay? Green is a relaxing color. That's why they actually have what they call the green room before you go out on a set, like on a movie set or on stage. You go sit in the green room and chill out. Yellow can create anxiety, or it could be literally irritating after a while. Purple is a calming color. Orange actually increases your appetite, so don't paint your kitchen orange, okay? But actually, blue decreases your appetite. So that's why your cabinets and your refrigerator should be blue, okay? Red is like a danger color, and we just associate with red with danger. So it attracts attention, okay? It's the idea of fast, can grab your attention. There's actually a study done where they took some kids who were going to be going into a testing, and they put them through a red room for a little while, and then went into the testing center. And those who went through that room actually did poorer on their test because it's associated with failure. Right, the teacher uses the red pen to mark. So that little bit of psychology before going into the test had an effect. It can also, red can be irritable. It could cause irritation. It could cause anger. It can make you more angry just having red around. But then there's another side of red that is interesting, that guys and girls are attracted to the opposite sex wearing red. It just, for some reason, draws attention and draws attraction. It makes them more desirable. So guys, a little trick, wear red pajamas when you're going to bed. Black is a power color. It just exudes authority, and it is also associated with evil. The bad guy's always in black, right? Now, you can believe it or not, okay? Some people are really strong on this, others are not, and doesn't really matter what your favorite color is or whether you wear it or not. Maybe. How about your favorite ice cream? What's your favorite ice cream? I'm a recovering ice creamaholic, and I like chocolate very much. I like coffee. I like the creamier ones. Not that I don't like cookies and cream and all that kind of stuff, but I like the ones that are just creamy, and so you just get the cream flavor, not all the extra stuff in there. Some of you don't like ice cream, right? You're like, so what is your favorite dessert? If it's not ice cream, and you can throw that up in the chat, But let me ask you this. If you loved me, okay, and I ate a lot of ice cream, and you knew I ate too much, would you try to tell me that I'm eating too much ice cream? You see, some of our preferences really don't matter, but some of them, they couldn't they? Is it possible that what we've done is we've separated too much the physical, the emotional, and the spiritual? Is it possible that we think that one doesn't impact the other? For example, like food is just physical, so it has no impact on other areas of our life. Like we could be very spiritual, but we could be totally out of shape physically. Can we? We could be an emotional wreck, and yet our health is fine, right? It won't have any effect on my health. It won't have any effect on my spiritual life. Or does it? And is sex and intimacy are not really connected. Today, as we continue our series, we're going to be talking about something that is very challenging. And so what I want to do is I want to give you a warning right out of the gate, okay? So that you know. This message will stir up the waters, okay? And it's going to stir it up in everybody. So I just want you to know that. You see, we live in a culture that on one side, we're told to be free. We're told that you can experiment, that no one has the right to judge you, that there's no limit to what you can do or want to do. There's nothing you can't practice. There's nothing or no one you can influence with what you want to do. And there's no age limit, okay? It is to the extreme, and it's probably worse than you even think, okay? And that's on the one side, that there's no limits. On the other side, we have brokenness, and we have emptiness, and we have loneliness, and we have sex scandals. We have the one with the Catholic Church, with the priests. You have ministers. You have high evangelical pastors in high, in large churches where you have scandals. You have affairs. When the Me Too whole thing came out, and it was a couple years back now already, but when it came out, it just lit up as more and more and more people were coming forward, and quickly there were over 19 million hits saying, yeah, me too. Someone took advantage of me. The thing with this whole thing is that no one has escaped. Nobody. It affects all of us. Sex out of place has affected every single one of us. Now, maybe not directly, but indirectly. It may have been an affair. Maybe not you directly, but maybe someone you know that impacted you or your friend or your family. Maybe a divorce. Maybe before you were ready. Maybe a painful situation or circumstance. A well-documented study came out, and the opening line of this study is this: amid the seamless, endless partying on America's college campuses lies a thick layer of melancholy, insecurity, and isolation that no one can seem to shake. It's not working. What Netflix tells us, and Amazon, and what the movies and TV and culture and friends and commercials and you could go on and on and on, what they've been telling us for now generation after generation after generation, it is a lie. It doesn't work. Either that, or they're just as confused about sex as so many others are. Now, in this series, what we've been doing is we've been asking questions. We've been learning how to ask questions. And here's a question to ask anybody. How come the hookup culture has left us unhappy, sexually unfulfilled, lonely, and still confused about intimacy? How come? Sex is broken, and we don't know how to fix it. Or at least we seem like we don't know how to fix it. Now, what we've been doing in a series, we've been talking about the gospel. We've been talking about how do we share the gospel. So we talked about what the gospel is. We talked about how do we share it in the best way possible. And for a lot of people, it's sharing the gospel means just like blurting it out there and telling everybody everything. And what we've been learning is there's maybe a better way, and that's to ask questions, to get to the questions that are going to get to what is holding people back, what is the pushback, and really what's the pain underneath that is bringing these questions to the surface anyway. So one question we have to ask. Now, this is a question you probably won't ask directly, but you need to be aware of this as you are engaging with other people. And the question is this: is sex the obstacle in accepting Jesus Christ? Is it possible that sexuality is behind the questions that are being asked, that it's holding someone back, and even maybe for a follower of Jesus Christ or someone who is really struggling, it's holding them back from growing in a relationship with Christ? Why? Because the struggle is real. It's very real. It's real in opposite sex attractions. If the struggle wasn't real, you would not hear about affairs. You would not hear about divorces. You would not hear about all the broken marriages. The book of Job, ancient book, Job talks about the struggle of opposite sex attractions in his book. There's a challenge of same-sex attraction. There's the struggle with pornography. And see, when many look at Christians, they're looking at Christians and they're saying, man, you're just intolerable, you're judgmental. And around that whole area usually is around the topic of sex, or underlying the topic of sex. And if we feel like we can't talk about it, if we feel like we're being judged to even bring up some questions, then we're not going to know how to fix it. You see, sex is a big deal. And for Christians, it's a lot easier to approach a subject by just, you throw out a few verses, you shout out some advice, because it's harder to dig into the mess. It's harder to get to the root of the problems, the root of the struggles, the root of the pain. But if we are to understand it and to address it, we must have a solid grasp ourselves of why God created sex. Now, Paul, who was a follower of Jesus Christ, he wasn't, but then he became one. His culture, and this is the culture of the early church, was worse than ours. And I know that's maybe hard to believe, but it was. As far as I know, it was a lot worse than ours, and although ours is catching up pretty quickly. But he saw the answer to the struggles, not rules and not throwing out just stuff. He saw it as the gospel. The gospel is the answer. And that's what he shares. And he writes this in his letter to the church in Rome. And he says this, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God to bring salvation to everyone who believes." You want something better? Are you tired of the brokenness, the loneliness, the emptiness? The gospel brings the power for new life. Paul then goes on to share after this verse where he's saying, look, I believe in the power of the gospel wholeheartedly. And then what he goes into sharing is, how do we now bring the power of the gospel into a culture that is so challenged in the area of sexuality? And how do you bring grace and how do you bring truth into that? And so he goes on, he says, "For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his internal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse." And we talked about this concept last week, that God's evident. I mean, you just have to look up into the heavens and how does one not see that there's something supernatural that created all this? God is evident. We just have to look. He goes on, he says, although they knew God, they neither glorified him nor they gave him thanks to him. But their thinking became futile and their foolish hearts were darkened. Not seeing God in Paul's mind it's a choice. You're choosing not to see the magnificence of God. The farther we get from God, the darker things will go. The more we will think we are wise, and yet Paul is saying, look, but you're not. You're not getting any wiser. And he goes on and says, although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. And they exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images made to look like mortal human beings. We chose. We choose to exchange because God will let us do that. He will let us choose not him over what we want. But that choice comes with a result. And listen as Paul goes on. He says, therefore God gave them over in their sinful desires of their hearts to sexual impurity, for the degrading of their bodies with one another. And so he gives them over. When we make those choices, God says, okay, I will let you go. I'm not going to stop you. And because of that, we continue to get further and further away from where God is. And as we get further and further away, we have to keep trying for something more and something more. Because we're not getting what we want. And so there has to be more. There has to be more. And in this more, and in this more, and in this more is more loneliness and more emptiness and more masking that it's not as bad as it looks. It's not as bad as it feels. What is at the heart of this? And this is where Paul is going. And this is where I really want to start, because I want to take you on a journey this morning. Is he says this, he said, they exchanged the truth about God for a lie. And they worshipped and served created things rather than Creator, who is forever to be praised. So what we do is we exchange this vertical relationship for a horizontal relationship. I want you, God, but I want him, and I want her, and I want her, and I want him. And so we're giving up this in order to get this. You see, idolatry at the core of what it is our gratification above anyone, anything, even the truth. And this is where the enemy wants us. He wants us to be in the place where we are lifting ourselves up so that we don't lift God up. What is God's desire for us? That's what we have to ask. What is God's desire? I mean, we all have our own desires, but what is it that God desires? So let's start with Jesus. Jesus was talking with the Pharisees. He did that quite often because they're always trying to trap him. They're always trying to get him in that that little thing where they're going to trip him up, and they keep thinking they're going to trip him up, and then he trips them up. And they're asking him this question, and this is the question they ask. Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason? Now, you got to love that question, right? Isn't that great? Like, what's the focus? What are they trying to trick up? And if you got some ideas, just throw it up in the chat, okay? What are they trying to do? They're trying to get Jesus to say, well, yeah, you can. Why? Because that's what they believe. That's what they have come to practice. They're basically asking, well, God gives us permission to do what we want to do whenever we want to do it, and it's okay, right? In other words, I want to be able to divorce on any and every reason. I want to be able, if my wife burns a dinner, she's out of here, okay? And I want to be able to say that. I want to be able to have that okay. If she gains 20 pounds, it doesn't matter how much I gain, but if she gains 20 pounds, I need to say she's out of here. Okay, can I divorce her for any and every reason? Because that's what we practice right now. Is that okay, Jesus? Listen to Jesus' response. Haven't you read? He replied. And I love this. This is like, these guys are theologians, okay? These are guys who are experts in the law. And Jesus is actually asking, have you read the Bible? That's what he's basically asking. Have you read? Haven't you read this? And then he replies that at the beginning, the Creator made them male and female. And he said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and his mother and be united with his wife. At the beginning, the Creator made. Who is the creator of marriage? God. Now, this is important, okay? Very important. Who created this whole thing? God did. Why? Jesus goes on and says, then the two of them are no longer two, but one flesh. And then he gives a quote that we're all used to when we go to a wedding. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no one separate. So if you're ever wondering where that came from, this is where it came from. Jesus said it. Two become one flesh. Remember that. That's important. We live in a culture where divorce is very common. And it's easy, not easy to go through. It's easy for every and any reason you want that you just get divorced. And Jesus explains divorce, and this is what he goes on to share. We're not going to go into all that. But he begins to explain to them that there's only one way out, okay? And it's not death, because that's another way, but there's only one way out of divorce, okay? But first, as he's sharing this, what I want you to hear is the disciples' response to Jesus. Because this blows you away when you hear this. He said, this is their turn. So he goes on, Jesus explains divorce, and we don't have time to go into all that. He says, if those are the terms, this is the disciples responding to what Jesus just said. If those are the terms of marriage, we haven't got a chance. So why get married? Now, Peter took a great offense to this because he's already married, okay? But the rest of them are like, Jesus, that's way up there. Why is Jesus' view of marriage so high? Because he created it. And the standard is so high. Paul's writing to the church in Corinth. And now, if you're not familiar with the church of Corinth, they're messed up, okay? They're having a lot of struggles. And he's writing because they're having these challenges on how they viewed their bodies. Because they thought that what they did with their bodies had no impact on their spiritual life. They had this disconnect. That yes, we can do whatever we want over here, but it has no impact at all on our spiritual life. And Paul's like, oh my goodness, okay, where do I start, okay? And so he's writing them this letter, and he says this, and he poses this question. Again, this is where we get this whole idea of questioning evangelism. Paul does, right? He says this, do you not know that who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in one body? Don't you know that? Now, why does he ask this question? Why is this so... why is this not an out there kind of a question? Because of the struggles of the day, okay, the struggles of today that we struggle with too, but it's the same struggles in Paul's day. That the cultures around him were practicing all kinds of stuff when it came to sex. And it had swept into the church. And the church was in a place where they're confused. They just didn't understand because this is our culture. This is what we live in. This is what a lot of them had came out of, okay? Because they were in that culture. Then they became Christians, and now they're struggling, and they're being drawn back into this. And Paul's like, guys, I got to set some little boundaries here, okay? They were struggling with this. Not just in the culture, they're struggling with this in the church. This is where we are today. And so Paul goes on, he says this, he says, for it is said that the two will become one flesh. This is his answer. Now wait, I thought that was husband and wife. And Paul's saying, yes, but yes. The union of the flesh has huge implications. And you can't deny those implications. Paul goes on to explain, he says this, all other sins a person commits are outside the body, but whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. The sexual union is a bond, and it can never be undone. That's where Paul's going with this. You've joined something together. Only God can separate that, right? And it's not just physical. And this bond we take into the next relationship, and 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 the next relationship, depending on how many times you bonded. And we wonder why we struggle in the current relationship. And this is what Paul is trying to explain. This is not as simple as there's the physical and there's the spiritual. We're all interconnected. We have this desire to seek intimacy. And the further we get away from God, the further we get away from intimacy. And so Paul says, listen, guys, you got to flee sexual immorality. Just flee it. Why? Because it's a huge struggle. And we're all under this struggle. And so any way you can get away from it, get away from it. When you and I share the gospel, we have to assume, right? Sex is a big topic. We have to assume that it's possible that under the questions surround the issue of sex. And we need to understand why this is so big. Why is this so important, and why is this such a big struggle? So I want you to listen again to Paul's words, third letter, okay? He's writing to the church in Ephesus, and he's telling husbands and wives, he's saying, I want you to submit one to another, okay? So there's equal submission. Husbands, submit to your wives. Wives, submit to your husband. Then he goes on, he says, okay, now wives, you submit to your husband, goes on to explain that. And then he gets to the husbands a little bit more, and he says this, husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with the water through the word. Paul going on says this, and to present to her, right, to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain, wrinkle, or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. Husbands, we got to do what Jesus did. How does that look? He goes on, in the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own body. He who loves his wife loves himself. See how Paul connects all this? He's connecting his writing in Romans, right? Who created it all? God did. And this love is not idolatry. It's not self-seeking. It's putting your wife above you. And your body is a part of that. Paul goes on, and of course, he's saying, look, no one hates their body, do they? You feed it, you take care of it, right? We feed it, we take care of it, and this is what Jesus does for the church. And then he goes on, he says this, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. And here we come back to this same thing again. God says it to Adam and Eve when Moses writes Genesis, and he's same thing. Same verse. When Jesus is questioned by the Pharisees, same thing. For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother, be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh. The two will become one. Why is this so big to Paul? Why is this so important when it comes to this whole issue? And then Paul goes on to explain something amazing. He said, this is a profound mystery. I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about Christ and the church. Do you want to know the intimacy that we can have with God? Do you want to get an image of that? Do you want to know how close that can be? The best way to describe it, Paul is saying, is the intimacy of the one flesh between a husband and wife. Nothing else can come close to describing that intimacy with God. That's why sex outside of God's design will leave you broken. It just will. It leaves us, I love this term. This is a term that Randy Newman used in his book. It leaves us intimacy impaired. Why? Because he created it. And he gives us a glimpse of what intimacy with him can be like. And the further we get away from that, the harder and the harder it's going to be to find intimacy. There are two cultural myths that exist out there. Two cultural myths. The first is this, that marriage relationship is not great. And that's what we're told continually, again and again and again in our culture, right? Marriage relationship is not great. Yes. Is there some painful marriages? Maybe some of you have experienced it. Maybe you know what it's like. If you are married, you know the ups and downs of married life, okay? But is it true? No. There are a lot of marriages out there that are very successful. There are a lot of marriages that are amazing, and we're just not seeing it. We're just not hearing about it. The second myth is that alternative sex relationships are great. That any other relationship outside the marriage, all kinds, and are better than you will ever experience in marriage. And the reality is the facts just are not there to prove it. The research that is done does not prove the myth that we're being taught in our culture. Here's the thing, sex is a real struggle. And we have a choice, especially when it comes to this topic. We can focus on the struggles. But see, if we start focusing on the struggles, when someone poses this question, well, is this right? This is okay. God will be okay with this, right? We could spend endless time over on the struggles because they're just getting more and more and more and more and more and more complicated. As I was doing research for this message, I came across an article and I was like, well, that's a new term. And the term was ethical non-monogamous. It's like, okay. Do you know what that means? We know what monogamy means. That means one husband, one wife, okay, right? It's monogamy. You decide that the two of you are going to stay together forever. Okay, that's monogamy. Okay, we know what polygamy is. Polygamy is one, usually a male person who has multiple wives. Okay, we understand that, although sometimes it's reversed, right? So we understand that. So non-monogamous means we're not going to be connected to one person, okay? But as long as everybody agrees, and everybody could be 3, 4, 5, I guess we go up to 100. I have no idea. But as long as everybody agrees, it's ethical. It's an ethical, non-monogamous relationship. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, wow, that's a new one. Okay. You will never find an end to the struggles. And we could spend a lot of time trying to answer questions that people have. Why don't we just show a solution? What's so good about marriage? That's the question being asked. What's so good about marriage? I saw my parents, they were married and we went through hell. I never want to experience that. I got married once, I got married twice, not me personally. Okay? But people are here and they're struggling. This is a hard challenge. Marriage is hard. Randy Newman, in his book, I was sharing this with my wife, Julie, I said, he states, he said, when are you going to figure out marriage? Do you know how long it takes to figure out marriage? About 50 years. You're about 70, 75 years old. You don't even remember each other's name at that point. So you know what difference does it make, right? It's like by the time you figure it out, it doesn't matter, right? It takes forever. And some of you know because maybe you're in your second marriage, or maybe you're in your third marriage, and I hope you're learning, don't quit, don't quit, don't quit. Yeah, but some people would say it's just a piece of paper. It's just a piece of paper. That's all it is. Who needs a piece of paper? We believe we're married, we don't need this piece of paper. I see so much more than that in marriage. What's so good about marriage? It's security. That's what it is. It's security. Our marriage is so much more than a piece of paper. We had this ceremony, and we had witnesses there, and we had our friends there, and we had relatives there. And we have people that we're still friends with today. And some of our relatives, and they were there to witness, to say, we see you making this commitment together. And our understanding was they're going to hold us to that commitment. I think that's pretty cool. What keeps us together is of God, because you know what? In this world, it's hard. And as a commitment for life, that's security. In an insecure world, man, it's someone to do life with. I just think that's cool to have someone to do life with, right? And so you ask the question, who do you have to do life with? What's so good about marriage? Oneness. Oneness. One flesh, right? The bond designed by God for marriage. And see, in that one flesh relationship, guess what? Your spouse sees your faults again and again and again and again. And guess what? You see their faults again and again and again. And isn't that the challenge, to grow through that in spite of all that stuff? You see, it's something more when the feelings fade, because feelings fade, if feelings wade. So let me ask you this. What do you do when the feelings fade? What do you do? I mean, do you just look elsewhere? What's so good about marriage? Comfort. Comfort. Is it risky? Yeah, marriage is terribly risky. But life is risky. And to know someone is there for you, that's not really risky. You see, outside of God's design, we get hurt. But God can fix that. And so you ask a question. Have you ever known someone who's had an affair? Oh, yeah. They probably go off and talk about a lot of them. Maybe their own. Well, let me ask you this. Have you ever known someone who's had an affair that God healed that marriage? And hopefully you do. And you could share that experience and say, you know what, I do. And it was amazing because they believed in a one flesh bond. And even though it was broken, even though there was a mess, God healed it, and it's stronger than it ever was before. That's the question. Have you ever known someone in a same-sex relationship that then chose to come out of that and start dating someone of the opposite sex? I know a few. Actually, I had coffee with a guy this past year. Another friend of mine introduced me to this guy, and we sat and had coffee, and he had been in a same-sex relationships, multiple relationships, for years and years. And he finally had enough hurt and enough pain, and he decided to come out. You don't hear about that a lot. And he met a woman who did the same thing, and they got married. And they have kids. And God has brought so much healing. Is it risky, marriage? Sure, but we seek comfort with one another, right? And it takes a lifetime to get there. A lifetime. And you don't have it all figured out. But you're committed for life. One of the most touching moments I ever saw in my life was my own mom. My mom and dad did not have a perfect marriage, and it wasn't bad. We didn't grow up in a bad situation, but it wasn't. They had their ups and downs. Times you saw them holding hands. Times you knew their bedroom door was closed. There were times though that you were like, oh, I didn't. And they didn't go at it hard, but there were struggles there. As a kid, as a teenager, as a young adult. But they were married almost 50 years, and my dad passed away. To watch my mom go up and say goodbye, and then she took the blanket that's on him and then just to tuck him in. That's comfort. To know somebody that may do that for you one day. What's so good about marriage? It consecrates. How can you be with one person for the rest of your life? Yeah, but what's the benefits of multiple partners? Have you ever done a list, pros and cons of that? And they may say, well, I'm just looking for the right person. So how's it going for you? How many relationships have you been in? How many marriages have you been in? See, because you'll never find the right person because you're always bringing into that relationship the wrong person. Because we come into a relationship both wrong, and we try to figure out how to make it right. What it does, when it consecrated, it protects the marriage from outside sources, outside forces that'll try to destroy your marriage. Read the book of Proverbs. That's pretty much what it's all about. Hey, protect it, protect it, protect it, because guess what? There's warnings and warnings and warnings of the mess of sex. Intimacy comes with a price. So what's so good about marriage? It proclaims. It proclaims what God wants to proclaim. Marriage humbles us because it's the constant brokenness and the constant healing, and the brokenness and the healing. Knowing that you are loved, and knowing that that person will love you through it all, and knowing that you will love them through it all. And what it does is it gives hope to others in a world that's hopeless. That there is a better way to do life. There's a better way to do relationships. Now, I know some of you out there watching, and you got your hurts and you got your doubts, and you've seen a lot, and you've experienced too much, and this has even challenged your faith. But those of you who are seeking to follow Jesus, what I want to encourage you with, and what I want to leave you with is this: learn to be a fan of marriage. Be a fan of marriage. Don't apologize for that. Share the good parts and create the hope, and don't be afraid to show some of the bad parts, because guess what? It's tough, right? But be a fan of marriage. It doesn't matter what flavor ice cream you like, okay? It doesn't. Okay? You can still be my friend if you don't like chocolate or coffee, okay? But did you know that the craving that you may have for ice cream is not necessarily a craving for ice cream? Did you know that literally that craving for ice cream can be a deficiency of magnesium or potassium or vitamin C? Did you know that? And so here we are trying to satisfy a crave that will never be satisfied. If you're out there and you're listening or you're watching, listen, if you're seeking, you're trying to find God and this is holding you back, listen, if God is real, okay, I believe it is, if he is real, if God created sex, shouldn't he know what it's all about? Shouldn't he be the one we go to for the answers? And God offers through the gospel, through Jesus Christ his Son, forgiveness and grace if you just choose to accept it. If you are a follower of Jesus Christ, that forgiveness and grace is there too. You know that. It's always there. But be a champion for marriage so that others may find Jesus Christ. Father, thank you so much for Jesus Christ. Thank you for this imagery that you've given us. Thank you for the example that you've given us. Lord, I pray for those who are hurting from whatever is in the past. That right now you bring a sense of healing into their lives. For some, Lord, they have given up on marriage. For some, Lord, they've chosen the single life, and for some, that's great. I mean, that's what you're calling them to do. But Lord, whether we choose to take that path or not, help us to always be champions for what you created, the marriage relationship. That others may not only experience what it means to have that close and intimacy, but that the world may see some hope in a world that's so confusing, that's so dark. Lord, we have the ability to bring that light. And so single or married, may we just be champions of what could be and what is possible. Why marriage? So that the world may see that there's a better option. And that's because of you. Thanks for creating it. Thank you for Jesus Christ. And we pray in his name. Amen.